The air of New Orleans in the summer of 1846 was thick, almost alive with heat, pressing against the skin like a heavy hand. Cicadas sang endlessly in the trees, and the faint hum of the river carried over the city like a constant reminder of trade, wealth, and bondage. Along the French Quarter's cobblestone streets, carriages rattled, their wheels splashing through puddles left by sudden rains. The smells of tobacco, roasted coffee, and spilled rum mixed with the stench of sweat from laboring bodies. Behind the brightly painted shutters and iron balconies, secrets festered. It was in these streets, under the glow of lantern light, that Lydia carried her burdens quietly, unseen yet unbroken. But before diving deeper into Lydia's story, the tale of a woman who plotted her path to justice across 12 suppers of silence and observation, pause here. If stories of resilience and hidden courage matter to you, remember to subscribe. More voices like Lydia's deserve to live beyond the silence history tried to bury. Lydia was 26 years old, her skin a warm bronze that bore the sun's touch, her eyes sharp and unyielding. Born into bondage on a plantation upriver, she had been sold at the age of 12 and brought to New Orleans, where the family of Monsieur Armand Lefebvre claimed her as property. For 14 years she had moved between kitchens, storerooms and dining halls, serving food with steady hands while keeping her thoughts guarded. Yet beneath her composed exterior lived a mind that refused to be caged. Every evening she served at the Lefebvre household suppers. They were not ordinary meals, but carefully arranged gatherings where merchants, planters and politicians discussed matters that shaped the very bones of Louisiana. Silver gleamed, candles flickered, and crystal glasses rang with toasts. The men spoke freely, as though those who poured their wine were no more than furniture. Lydia listened. She memorized. She stitched their careless words into patterns. Her work began in silence. The delicate placement of roasted duck, the careful pouring of claret, the measured steps behind their chairs. Yet her real task lay elsewhere, in noticing who lingered too long on a glass, whose laughter covered insecurity, whose eyes betrayed ambition or fear. Lydia's gaze was steady but discreet, her mind sharper than any blade. Each supper became a book without pages, and she its reader. Still, the weight of survival pressed against her chest. To be seen listening too closely, to meet a man's eye too directly, could bring punishment swift and merciless. Fear was always near, like a shadow that never left her side. Samuel, the head cook, often warned her with furrowed brows when her concentration lingered too long. "Girl," he would mutter in the heat of the kitchen, "your silence is your only shield. Don't let them catch you with your ears open wider than your mouth." Lydia nodded outwardly, but inwardly she could not stop. In those quiet hours between dusk and midnight, as she cleared plates and folded linens, she began to imagine a plan. It would not be born of fists or flames, but of patience, precision, and knowledge. The powerful men who laughed and bragged at the table were not invincible. They were divided, vain, and careless. She would bide her time, she would gather what they spilled. One supper at a time she would weave their own arrogance into a snare. Her resolve was not for herself alone. She thought of her mother, sold further south and lost to her forever. She thought of Clara, the timid young servant who trembled at every sound. She thought of Samuel, whose back carried scars from the overseer's whip. Their lives were bound together in silence, but Lydia's heart beat with the stubborn rhythm of resistance. The night deepened outside the Lefebvre household. Lanterns dimmed along the quarter, and the distant sound of a fiddle drifted from Congo Square. Lydia stood at the window for a moment before returning to her duties, the weight of her plan pressing as heavily as the humid air. 12 suppers would pass before her chance arrived. 12 nights where silence would be her weapon and memory her blade. And so it began, with the first gathering, the first whispers, and the first spark of rebellion that would not burn with fire, but with knowledge. The days in New Orleans bled into one another, like the slow drift of the Mississippi, heavy with labor, commerce, and quiet despair. By morning, the Lefebvre household was already stirring, pots clattering in the kitchen, brooms sweeping the tiled floors, and the scent of chicory coffee rising from the servants' quarters, though it was never meant for their lips. Outside, the streets bustled with vendors calling out their goods, baskets of shrimp, bolts of cloth, fresh sugar loaves. The city was alive, but for those bound in chains, it pulsed with reminders of captivity at every corner. Lydia moved through these routines with practiced grace. Her tasks were endless, hauling water, polishing brass, ironing fine linens until her arms ached. Yet each action became part of the rhythm of survival. She learned to hide her thoughts behind lowered eyes, to make her silence seem like submission. But inside, her mind never rested. Each day added another layer of endurance, another brick to the wall of patience she built within herself. In the sweltering kitchen, Samuel bent over a pot, stirring with the precision of a craftsman. His hair had grayed, his hands were roughened from decades of heat and labor, but his eyes held a depth of care Lydia often leaned on. "You move too fast, girl," he muttered one morning, shaking his head as she rushed to finish her chores. "Fast feet make loud noise, and loud noise draws eyes. Eyes bring trouble." "I know," Lydia replied softly, brushing sweat from her forehead. "But stillness feels like dying. I have to keep moving." Samuel's gaze softened, but his voice stayed firm. "Movement is good when it keeps you alive. Remember that." He did not ask what thoughts lived behind her restlessness. He had seen too much to believe that dreams were safe companions. Clara, on the other hand, whispered her fears whenever she found Lydia alone. Clara was barely 20, her voice trembling even in casual speech, as though each word feared punishment. "Why do you always watch them?" she asked one night as they folded sheets together. Her hands fumbled with the fabric, her eyes darting toward the hallway. "If they notice, they'll say you're plotting something. They'll send you away or worse." Lydia pressed her lips together before answering. "I watch because it's the only thing they cannot chain. My eyes, my mind, those belong to me." Clara shivered, lowering her gaze. "Not if they take them from you. Please, Lydia, just keep your head down." The warning hung between them, heavy as the iron keys the overseer carried at his belt. But Lydia did not surrender her resolve. She knew Clara's words came from fear, a fear that had grown roots in every enslaved person who had seen punishments meted out without mercy. And yet, Lydia also knew that silence and submission had never broken the chains. They had only kept them polished. Still, the obstacles were suffocating. In the Lefebvre household, even a glance could betray more than a spoken word. Letters were locked away in drawers, conversations carried out in French to exclude prying ears, and the overseer's presence lingered like a shadow in every room. Lydia learned to steady her face so that no flicker of curiosity betrayed her. She trained herself to appear distant, even while her mind absorbed every detail. What gave her strength were the smallest moments, snippets of conversation overheard in the market, the touch of cool night air after the stifling heat of the kitchen, the rare laughter that slipped past Samuel's guarded lips. Each fragment reminded her that there was a world beyond servitude, one worth holding on to even if it seemed impossibly far away. At night, when her duties were done, Lydia often lay awake on her narrow cot, listening to the hum of the city through the shutters. Carriages rolled by, laughter drifted from taverns, and music from a distant fiddle wove through the air. The city never slept, and neither did her determination. She repeated to herself the vow she could not share aloud. One day the silence would break, and those who thought her invisible would learn the weight of what she carried. For now, she had to endure. Endurance was its own form of resistance, and Lydia carried it like armor across every waking hour. Tomorrow another supper awaited, another night of listening, another chance to turn their arrogance into her weapon. The Lefebvre household gleamed with preparation that night. Silver trays were polished until they reflected candlelight, like small mirrors, and the long dining table was dressed in fine linen, each place set with meticulous care. The smell of roasted duck, spiced vegetables, and buttered bread drifted through the hall, a fragrance meant to impress wealthy guests. Outside, the night was thick and humid, a slow-moving veil that wrapped around the city. Inside, anticipation buzzed, as though the house itself knew the weight of what was about to unfold. Lydia entered the dining hall with the quiet assurance she had perfected over years of servitude. Her posture was steady, her steps measured, her eyes cast downward just enough to suggest obedience. Yet beneath the calm surface of her demeanor, her mind was alive, alert, and sharp as a blade. Tonight would be different. Tonight she would begin. The men gathered around the table carried themselves with the arrogance of power. Monsieur Armand Lefebvre presided at the head, his French accent sharpening his words as he boasted of recent shipments and profits. To his right sat Monsieur Duval, whose tobacco plantations had brought him wealth enough to wear ruby cufflinks. Across from him lounged Henry Whitaker, a planter from Mississippi, his face flushed from drink even before the first toast. Lydia noted these details carefully, storing them as one would store tools for a future task. As she poured wine into crystal glasses, Lydia listened. Their conversation at first seemed ordinary, discussions of cotton yields, trade tariffs, and the ever-present concern of abolitionist pressure from the North. But beneath the casual boasting and laughter, she sensed the subtle tensions. Whitaker drank heavily, his laughter too loud, his words sometimes slurred. Duval leaned closer to Lefebvre, whispering with the intensity of a man who trusted few. And Armand himself, though outwardly confident, tapped his fingers against the table in restless rhythm. "Mark my words," Whitaker slurred after his third glass of Bordeaux. "The North can talk all it wants, but the South holds the true power. Let them try to break us, and they'll find we are not so easily bent." His words earned nods from some, unease from others. Lydia bent to refill his glass, her face neutral, though inside she recognized an opening. Here was a man careless with drink, prone to reveal more than he intended. She would remember. Later, as dishes of fish and rice were served, Duval spoke with hushed urgency. "Armand, the tariffs will strangle us if left unchecked. We cannot continue like this. The merchants in the quarter already complain, and if debts rise—" His voice dropped lower, forcing Lydia to lean ever so slightly while setting down a plate. She caught fragments: debts, risk, tension. Each word pressed into her memory like ink on parchment. Samuel's warning echoed in her mind: "Your eyes will betray you before your tongue ever does." She forced her gaze to remain steady on her task, though her heart pounded. She wanted to absorb everything. Every careless word dropped in confidence. Yet she knew too much eagerness could undo her. When the guests laughed at a crude joke, Lydia allowed herself the smallest exhale, blending back into invisibility. Their laughter rang out, oblivious to the fact that she was recording every syllable, weaving their pride into her silent tapestry of knowledge. In the kitchen later, Clara pulled her aside. "You stare too much," she whispered, her hands trembling as she gathered dirty plates. "If they see your eyes, Lydia, they'll know. They'll know you're not just listening, you're watching." And then she broke off, unable to finish. Lydia touched her arm gently. "Clara, I am only doing what I must. They see me as invisible. I will use their blindness against them." Clara's wide eyes shimmered with fear. "Invisible things are noticed when they move too much. Please, Lydia, don't risk it." But Lydia had already made her choice. Tonight was the first of 12 suppers. Each one would offer her another thread to weave into her plan. She returned to her work with a heart that beat both with fear and with determination, knowing the path she had chosen could not be undone. The second supper arrived only a week later, the Lefebvre household once again alight with preparations. The servants moved quickly, their motions rehearsed, each detail sharpened by the fear of mistakes. Lydia carried trays of bread and bottles of wine from the kitchen, her mind calm but alert. She felt the weight of the previous week's observations pressing against her, whispering to remain cautious, yet she could not resist the pull of opportunity. Each supper was a door slightly ajar, and she would not let it close. That night the table welcomed familiar faces along with a few new ones. The wealthy men greeted one another with booming voices, their laughter swelling as brandy and claret filled their glasses. To the outside eye it was a scene of power and prosperity, but Lydia had learned to look past surfaces. She studied the cracks that widened when the drink flowed. It was Monsieur Bernard Lacroix who betrayed himself that night. His face, once stern and dignified, grew loose with drink, and his tongue followed. While others debated tariffs and shipping routes, Lacroix leaned too close to Whitaker. muttering in a voice not meant for servants' ears. "Cards," he slurred, gripping his glass. "Those cursed cards. They'll bury me if fortune does not change." Whitaker chuckled, half amused and half mocking. "Then keep playing, Bernard. Luck will find you eventually, or it won't, and your lands will pass to wiser hands." The men roared with laughter, dismissing his confession as nothing more than drunken weakness, but Lydia caught every word. She moved behind the chairs with silent steps, filling glasses as though her ears were deaf. Inside, however, her mind sharpened like a quill on parchment. Debt. Here was a man tangled in debt, a man who boasted by day, but trembled by night. Clara, serving at the far end of the table, caught Lydia's eye. Her face was pale, her hands shaking as she set down a platter of fish. Later in the kitchen, Clara's fear spilled out. "You heard him," she whispered harshly, clutching Lydia's arm. "Don't you dare remember it. Forget it, Lydia. If they knew you held their secrets, they'd—" She broke off, glancing around the dim kitchen as though the walls themselves might betray her. Lydia answered with quiet firmness. "I will not forget. His debts are as real as these plates in our hands. They believe us blind, Clara. That blindness is their mistake." Clara shook her head, her lips pressed tight. "You will bring ruin down on us. If not you, then me. I can't live with that." The exchange carved a heavy silence between them, one Lydia could not mend with words. Clara's fear was deep, older than either of them, etched into her bones by years of watching punishments fall on those who dared too much. Lydia understood that fear, but she could not allow it to chain her. She had already begun, and there was no turning back. As the supper drew to its close, Lacroix stumbled to his feet, offering a clumsy toast. His words tumbled together, praising fortune and mocking the North, yet his eyes betrayed him. Lydia saw the shadow there, the desperation of a man who lived at the edge of ruin. She tucked it away, knowing such weakness could unravel greater men than whips ever could. Back in her quarters that night, Lydia lay awake, her body exhausted but her mind restless. The sounds of the city drifted through the shutters, laughter from taverns, hooves striking cobblestones, distant music. She thought of Lacroix's words, of his debts hidden beneath silk and gold. Knowledge was power, Samuel had said in his own way, though he feared she might wield it. But Lydia understood. Power could be built from the cracks men worked so hard to hide. Tonight, she had found one such crack. Tomorrow there would be more. The path ahead remained dangerous, yet the silence she carried no longer felt like emptiness. It was beginning to fill, supper by supper, with the fragile truths of the men who believed themselves untouchable. The morning after the second supper, the city of New Orleans pulsed with its usual chaos. The French market stretched wide along the river, stalls crowded with merchants calling out in French, English, and Creole. The air was thick with the mingled scents of spices, smoked fish, fresh fruit, and sweat. Voices clashed like waves, bargaining, gossiping, cursing. For the enslaved, the market was both a place of labor and, in rare moments, a place of exchange, not just of goods, but of whispers. Lydia moved carefully between the stalls, a basket balanced on her hip. She was sent to purchase flour, beans, and salt pork for the household, but her eyes lingered on more than food. The market was alive with people from every corner of the city, free people of color selling crafts, enslaved men carrying loads, Creole women in bright dresses bargaining fiercely. Here, boundaries blurred just enough that a word could slip between the cracks of authority. At the edge of a spice stall, Lydia's gaze caught that of Jean-Baptiste. He was a tall man with a musician's poise, his skin the shade of polished mahogany, his smile quick but cautious. Lydia knew him by reputation more than by words, a free man of color who played fiddle at gatherings in Congo Square and was rumored to have sympathies that leaned toward the abolitionists. "Good morning," Jean said, his voice low but steady as he handed her a small pouch of peppercorns. "The Lefebvre still send you here, I see. Their table must be rich." Lydia lowered her eyes, cautious of ears around them. Their mouths are always hungry. They never stop. She adjusted the basket on her hip, her voice just above a whisper. "But I listen while I serve. Jean's brows lifted slightly. Listening can be dangerous, or it can be powerful. Before Lydia could answer, a guard strolled past, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. She bent her head quickly, pretending to study the spices. Jean, without missing a beat, shifted his tone to one of casual commerce. "The pepper is strong this season," he said aloud. "It adds fire to even the blandest pot." When the guard moved on, Lydia met his eyes briefly. "I need more than fire," she murmured. "I need direction." Jean leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Direction comes with risk, and risk requires trust. Not every ear here is friendly." He nodded subtly toward another stall where an overseer lingered, pretending to inspect fruit. "Speak carefully, Lydia. Even the walls in this city have tongues." Her heart raced, but she kept her expression calm. "I will speak when I must. Until then, I will remember." Jean gave a faint smile. "Then remember this. What they build with greed can be undone with truth. But truth needs a path to walk. When you're ready, find me again." With that, he handed her the pouch and stepped away into the crowd, blending with the sea of voices and colors. On her walk back to the Lefebvre house, Lydia replayed the exchange in her mind. The market's noise faded into the background as her thoughts sharpened. She now knew she was not entirely alone. There were people beyond the household who carried different loyalties, people who might see her not as property, but as a mind capable of shaping its own destiny. Yet the risk gnawed at her. The overseer's glance at the stall had not been lost on her. One wrong word, one misstep, and suspicion could fall heavy. Clara's fearful warnings echoed in her ears. "Don't let them see you think." But Lydia could not stop. The market had given her a taste of something she had long hungered for: connection. She had learned her silence could be more than endurance. It could be a bridge to others who understood the hidden war she was fighting. By the time she returned home, the basket heavy on her hip, Lydia's resolve was firmer than ever. The suppers would continue, each one another chance to collect threads, and now perhaps she had someone who could help her weave them. By the time the third supper arrived, Lydia felt the strain of holding so many secrets in her mind. Nights brought little rest, her dreams tangled with fragments of conversations, tariffs, debts, pride, and fear. Yet the rhythm of servitude allowed her no pause. She moved through her daily tasks with steady discipline, waiting for the moment the household once again filled with voices too careless to guard themselves. That evening, the dining room brimmed with expectation. Candles flickered against the polished wood, and the clinking of glasses signaled another round of wealth on display. Lydia, with her steady hands and lowered gaze, took her place among the servants, her thoughts already sharpening for what the night might reveal. The men gathered quickly, turned to matters of business. Monsieur Lefebvre opened the discussion with confidence, boasting of his recent shipments along the Mississippi. Yet as the night unfolded, the smooth facade cracked. Tensions rose when Monsieur Duval accused another guest of undercutting prices. "You flood the market with cheap sugar," Duval snapped, his voice hard as steel. "Do you mean to ruin us all for the sake of your greed?" The accused, Monsieur Pelletier, leaned back with a smug smile. "If your plantations cannot keep pace, that is not my fault. Trade rewards the clever, not the sluggish." The table grew tense, laughter replaced by sharp tones. Whitaker, already flushed with wine, slammed his fist against the table. "Your bickering will hand the merchants in New York more power than they already have. Is that what you want, to see northern hands choke southern profits?" The words spilled with anger, but Lydia heard more than rage. She heard division. These men who ruled over lives with iron fists could not rule themselves with unity. Their rivalries were as sharp as their knives, their greed pulling them apart, even as they toasted to shared prosperity. Moving quietly among them, Lydia poured wine with practiced grace, her ears catching every insult and every whispered defense. She noticed how Lefebvre tried to soothe tempers, though his face betrayed worry. He depended on alliances to keep his position strong, yet his guests quarreled like crows over scraps. In the kitchen later, Samuel gave her a knowing look. "What storm brewed in there tonight?" he asked, wiping his brow with the back of his sleeve. "Greed against greed," Lydia answered. They fight like brothers with one inheritance. They claim unity, but they are divided. Samuel shook his head slowly. Careful, girl. A divided house can still crush what lies beneath it. Lydia offered him a faint smile. But cracks spread, Samuel. They always do. Still, she understood the danger. If their conflicts grew too visible, punishments would fall harder on those who served. Yet Lydia felt the spark of something stronger, a recognition that their power was not absolute. Their empire of sugar and cotton rested on fragile alliances, and fragile things could be broken. When she returned to her cot that night, she feared her memory might fail her. There were too many words, too many details to keep. Writing was forbidden, dangerous. To be found with even a scrap of hidden notes would mean certain punishment. So Lydia turned to the rhythm of song. Softly beneath her breath, she hummed patterns of sound, each note tied to a memory. Duval's accusations, Pelletier's arrogance, Whitaker's drunken anger. The melody became her ledger, invisible and safe, carried in her mind where no overseer could reach. She closed her eyes, the song lulling her toward restless sleep. Each verse held a secret, each rhythm a truth. The men at the table believed themselves untouchable, but Lydia knew better. Their divisions were seeds, and she was gathering them, one by one, until the harvest would come. The house lay quiet now, but her thoughts refused to rest. Tonight had shown her what she needed most. The powerful were not one, and that truth, if nurtured, could change everything. The quarrels of the Last Supper lingered in the Lefebvre house long after the candles were snuffed. Servants whispered about the raised voices, about the slam of Whitaker's fist and the sharpness in Duval's tone. For them, discord among masters was dangerous, for it often spilled downward, falling hardest on the backs of those who could not protest. Clara felt this truth more deeply than anyone. She found Lydia in the laundry room the next morning, steam rising from the boiling pots where linens churned. Clara's hands trembled as she wrung a sheet, her voice breaking as she spoke. "You must stop, Lydia. You look at them too long, you listen too closely. One day someone will notice." Lydia kept her gaze fixed on the fabric she was folding. "They do not see me, Clara. Not truly. To them, I am a shadow in the corner, a pair of hands. Shadows are not dangerous until they move." Clara's voice rose, almost desperate. "That is exactly why it is dangerous. Shadows can be chased. Shadows can be beaten. I have seen what happens when they think someone has stepped out of their place. Do you want the lash? Do you want chains on your ankles?" Lydia turned to her, her expression calm but firm. "I do not want chains. That is why I do what I do. Each word they spill is a stone in the wall they build to keep themselves powerful. But if I gather those stones, maybe one day I can bring part of that wall down." Clara's eyes filled with tears, her body tense as though she carried a weight too heavy. "You are braver than I am," she whispered. "Or maybe just more reckless." "Maybe both," Lydia admitted softly. She reached out and touched Clara's hand, steadying it. "But I cannot live as if silence is the only choice. I will not ask you to do the same, only to trust that I know what I risk." Their conversation was interrupted by the heavy steps of the overseer passing down the hall. Clara's breath caught, her knuckles white against the sheet she gripped. Lydia, sensing her fear, raised her voice just enough for him to hear words of obedience. "Yes, Clara, the linens must be folded finer, or Monsieur will be displeased." The overseer's shadow passed by without pause, and Clara sagged with relief. When his steps faded, she turned to Lydia, her eyes wide. "You cover for me when you should be protecting yourself. Why?" "Because you are my sister in this place," Lydia said firmly. "Your fear is not weakness. It is proof you still want to survive, and I need you alive, Clara. I need you with me." Clara's lips trembled, torn between gratitude and dread. She wanted to believe, but fear clung to her like a second skin. She nodded slowly, though doubt still clouded her eyes. That night, as Lydia carried water to the kitchen, she felt the overseer's gaze linger on her longer than usual. Perhaps he had begun to suspect the quiet exchanges between her and Clara. Perhaps he had seen how Clara leaned too closely when they whispered. Lydia forced herself to remain steady, her face calm, her steps unhurried. To falter now would invite the very suspicion Clara feared. Later, when the house settled into silence, Lydia sat awake on her cot. Clara slept fitfully beside her, murmuring in her dreams. Lydia's thoughts churned, heavy with the weight of choice. She knew her path endangered not just herself, but those closest to her. Yet she also knew fear could not rule her heart. Clara's loyalty, though fragile, was a spark she could protect. And with every supper, every overheard word, Lydia's resolve deepened. She whispered into the darkness a vow meant only for herself. "I will endure, and when the time comes I will strike, not with fire or blade, but with the truths they carelessly drop. They will not see me until it is too late." The night carried her words into silence, a promise bound as tightly as the chains she refused to accept. The fourth supper began under a heavy air, thunderheads gathering beyond the Mississippi, and a restless tension hanging over the city. In the Lefebvre dining hall, candles glowed against storm-dark windows, and the men arrived in cloaks damp with evening rain. Their voices, however, carried the same certainty as always, boasting, scheming, laughing at misfortunes that never touched their own. Tonight, though, a new voice sat among them, Judge Nathaniel Pierce, a man whose presence drew a hush even from his peers. Pierce was tall and lean, his eyes pale as river fog, his mouth set in a line that rarely curved to a smile. He was known throughout Louisiana for his rulings, which always favored masters over the enslaved. His reputation was a blade, sharp, merciless, and carried with pride. Lydia, pouring brandy at his side, felt his authority like a chill against her skin. As the meal unfolded, the men turned their talk toward the courts. Pierce raised his glass and spoke with the calm assurance of one untouchable. "I sat in judgment last week of a boy accused of theft," he said. "He swore the coin had been planted in his pocket, yet the word of a slave against his master's." "You know the outcome." Laughter rippled around the table. Lefebvre leaned in with approval. "Your judgments keep order, Nathaniel. Without them, chaos would flood the streets." Pierce nodded, savoring his drink. "Order is the spine of civilization. Those who serve must remain bound to their place. If the law bends, the whole structure collapses." Lydia's hand trembled as she refilled a glass, though she steadied it before anyone could see. Inside, anger coiled hot and sharp. These men spoke of law not as justice, but as a cage, a weapon turned against the weak. Each word confirmed what she already knew. There was no fairness in the courts, no balance on the scales. To them, the law was nothing more than a shield for their greed. Whitaker, his cheeks flushed, leaned closer to Pierce. "But tell me, Judge, does it not trouble you to condemn a man or child, knowing he may be innocent?" Pierce's smile was thin, his tone colder than the rain outside. "Innocence is irrelevant when obedience is required. Better to punish one wrongly than to let defiance spread like rot." The words sank deep into Lydia's chest, leaving a weight she carried even as she moved silently from chair to chair. She saw Clara at the far end of the table, her face pale, her eyes lowered. Clara heard the same words, and fear carved them deeper into her. In the kitchen afterward, Clara's voice shook. "Did you hear him? Even the law will not save us. There is no hope." Lydia set down the tray she carried, her eyes steady despite the storm raging in her heart. "No hope in their law, no. But their pride blinds them. They think themselves gods, yet even gods stumble when they cannot see the ground beneath them." Samuel, listening from the hearth, sighed heavily. "Careful, Lydia. The law is not a man you can outthink. It is a wall built high with stones heavier than us all." "Walls crack," Lydia said quietly, "and when they do, even the smallest hands can widen them." That night, as rain drummed on the roof, Lydia lay awake, the judge's words echoing in her ears. Innocence irrelevant. Better to punish than to risk defiance. Rage burned, but so did resolve. The law might stand as their fortress, but even fortresses had weak stones, and she had begun to gather them, supper by supper, memory by memory. The storm outside raged until dawn, but inside Lydia's mind, the path forward had never been clearer. Sunday arrived with the golden light of morning spreading across New Orleans. For the enslaved, it was the single day granted a breath of freedom, though that breath was still measured and watched. In the open field near Rampart Street, Congo Square, music, trade, and movement came alive. Drums beat steady as heartbeats, fiddles sang sharp melodies, and voices lifted in rhythms that carried memory across oceans. Lydia walked among the gathering with Clara at her side. For Clara, the square was a place of small comforts, buying a ribbon, sharing gossip, tasting something sweet she could not find in the Lefebvre kitchen. For Lydia, it was more than comfort, it was survival. Here she could see people unshackled by fear, if only for an afternoon. The music filled her chest with a strength she could not find in silence. She paused near a circle of dancers, their feet pounding the earth as drums surged louder. The beat carried not only joy but history, whispers of lands stolen, families torn apart, yet spirits unbroken. Lydia closed her eyes for a moment, letting the rhythm press into her memory like the secret verses she used to hold men's words. Clara tugged her arm. "Don't draw attention," she warned. "You look too long at things, Lydia. Someone will notice." "I am noticing life," Lydia answered softly. "Is that so dangerous?" Clara frowned, lowering her gaze. "Here, even joy can be punished." Before Lydia could reply, a voice rose behind her. "You listen with more than your ears." She turned to see Jean-Baptiste, fiddle slung over his shoulder, his eyes warm but searching. He nodded toward the drums. "Most only hear the sound. You hear the meaning." Lydia felt a flicker of recognition, the same connection she had felt at the market. "Meaning is all I have," she said. "It is what they cannot take." Jean stepped closer, his voice low enough that Clara had to lean to hear. "Songs carry more than rhythm. They carry messages. Some beats tell when to meet, some tell when to wait, some warn of danger. Do you understand?" Lydia's eyes sharpened. "I do." Clara, alarmed, shook her head quickly. "No, Lydia, don't. Don't listen to this." John's gaze moved to Clara with patience. "Fear is wise, but silence alone has never broken chains." He looked back at Lydia. "If you ever need to send word, there are ways." Drums carry far, and so do trusted tongues. The three stood in tense quiet, the music rising around them, filling every space. Finally, Clara whispered, "If anyone heard what you just said—" "They didn't," Lydia cut in, her voice firm. She met Jean's eyes. "I will remember." Jean gave the faintest smile before turning away, blending back into the swirl of dancers and musicians. The afternoon carried on with trade and laughter, yet Lydia's mind remained fixed on his words. Music as message, songs as code. What seemed to the masters like harmless ritual was, in truth, a language of survival. She thought of the judge's declaration at the supper that law was order, obedience required. Yet here in Congo Square another law thrived, one unspoken but stronger, community. As the sun dipped lower, Clara clutched Lydia's arm. "I wish you would let this go. The more you carry, the heavier it will crush you." Lydia's voice was calm, but inside her chest, resolve burned like fire. "No, Clara. The more I carry, the stronger I become. Every word I hear, every beat I learn, it all leads somewhere." They left the square as twilight fell, the drums still echoing in the distance. Lydia walked with her head high, her heart steady to the rhythm. She no longer carried only the secrets of wealthy men, but also the songs of her people. Both, she knew, would matter when the time came. The fifth and sixth suppers came close together, as though the Lefebvre sought to fortify their place among allies before tensions rose further. For Lydia, the pace was relentless. 2 nights of listening, memorizing, and balancing her invisibility against her growing awareness. Fatigue tugged at her bones, but her mind sharpened with every word spilled across the polished table. At the fifth supper, the talk turned heated when Monsieur Lacroix, flushed with wine, began to boast. "They say the merchants in Havana undercut us, but I tell you, it is the captains who cheat. Ships leave our ports heavy and arrive in Cuba light. Half the profit disappears into pockets not our own." The room hummed with unease. Accusations of fraud touched too closely on the fragile trust between planters and traders. Lefebvre attempted to smooth the conversation, but Whitaker's booming laugh filled the hall. "Then perhaps, Bernard, you've simply lost track of your accounts. like your debts at the card tables. Lydia refilled glasses with quiet precision, her eyes lowered, though her ears caught every word. Fraud in shipping, a man ruined by gambling. The cracks widened further, their empire resting on dishonesty and arrogance. Later that same evening, Clara brushed past Lydia in the hallway, her voice a sharp whisper. "You're listening again. Your eyes give you away." "My eyes are all I have," Lydia murmured back. "Do not ask me to blind them." Clara's reply trembled with fear. "One day someone will catch you, and when they do, they won't stop at you, they'll punish us all." But Lydia only pressed her lips together and returned to her work. The risk was real, but so was the knowledge she gathered. The sixth supper came only a night later, and the guests arrived already carrying the strain of old arguments. Lydia could feel the tension before the meal began, a restless energy in their voices. Tonight, talk drifted northward. "They grow louder in Washington," Pelletier muttered, his words clipped. "Abolitionists publish pamphlets, call us monsters. If they succeed in poisoning enough minds, trade itself will crumble." Judge Pierce, again present, answered coldly, "Pamphlets do not frighten me. No court in the South will heed them." Whitaker leaned forward, voice low but seething. "Do not be so sure. Northern influence grows. Already my cousin in Philadelphia refuses to trade openly with me. He hides behind talk of conscience, but it is fear of his neighbor's judgment. Fear spreads faster than fire." The men argued deep into the night, their words slicing like knives. Lydia kept her movements slow and deliberate, but her heart thudded when Whitaker suddenly looked up at her. "You there?" he barked, his eyes narrowed. "What is your name?" For a heartbeat, the hall went still. Lydia's hand tightened around the wine jug, though her face betrayed nothing. She lowered her eyes and answered softly, "Lydia, sir." Whitaker studied her a moment longer before waving his hand dismissively. "Pretty name for one who holds no power. Refill my glass." The men laughed and the moment passed, but Lydia's chest burned. For an instant she had been seen, not as a person but as a slip in their performance of dominance. Clara's warning echoed in her ears, and Samuel's words returned like an old refrain. "Your eyes will betray you before your tongue ever does." That night, as she lay on her cot, sleep refused to come. She repeated the events in her mind. Lacroix's drunken confession, the accusations of shipping fraud, the growing fear of northern voices, Whitaker's sudden question. Every detail pressed against her memory until she whispered them softly, turning them into verses only she could understand. 2 suppers, 2 steps deeper into risk. Yet Lydia felt her resolve sharpen. They might notice her name, her eyes, her silence, but they would not see the truth she carried. Not yet. The days after the 6th supper were heavy with unease. Lydia moved through the Lefebvre household with the same measured grace as always, but a shadow seemed to follow her now. Every time the overseer's eyes lingered on her, every time a master's gaze sharpened, she felt the edge of danger closer than before. Clara avoided her glances, too afraid to speak openly, though her silence carried its own warning. One night, as the house slept and only the cicadas sang beyond the shutters, a hurried whisper pulled Lydia from her cot. Samuel stood in the dim light of the kitchen, his face drawn with worry. "Lydia," he said low, "someone has been talking." Her stomach tightened. "Talking about what?" "About you," Samuel replied, his voice grave. "There's a man among the servants, Thomas. He went to the overseer, said you linger too long when the masters speak, said your eyes follow their lips. He swore you're listening where you shouldn't." Lydia felt the world narrow around her. Betrayal. She had been careful, always careful, but one man's fear or greed could undo everything. Why would he do this, she asked, though the answer already stirred in her mind. Samuel's lips pressed thin. The overseer promised him favor, lighter work maybe, or just the chance to keep his own skin clear. Some men will trade another's life for a few breaths of ease. Before Lydia could respond, Clara appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with terror. "I heard them," she blurted. "The overseer said he would watch you tonight. If he sees one wrong move, he'll report you straight to Lefebvre." The fear in her friend's voice was enough to chill Lydia's blood. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. Then I must be nothing more than what they believe me to be. A shadow, a hand that serves. They will not find what they're looking for. Clara's breath came fast, panic etched into her face. Please, Lydia. Promise me you'll stop. You've gone too far. If they catch you... Lydia reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Clara, listen. I will not stop, but I will protect you. If suspicion falls, let it fall on me alone. Do not betray what you do not carry. Clara shook her head violently. No, I can't. Samuel cut in, his tone sharp but laced with care. Both of you hush. Words carry. Even walls have ears here. He fixed his gaze on Lydia. Girl, your fire burns too bright. You think you can walk through shadows without being seen, but shadows move when light touches them. Remember that. Lydia held his eyes, unflinching. And I will use that light, Samuel. I will blind them with their own pride before they see me. The kitchen fell silent, broken only by the crackle of embers dying in the hearth. Clara clung to Lydia's arm, trembling, her tears unchecked. I don't want to lose you, she whispered. You won't, Lydia answered, though the certainty in her words masked the storm in her chest. I have not come this far to fall now. That night, she lay awake, every sound sharpening her senses, the scrape of a chair in the hall, the creak of footsteps overhead, the rustle of wind through the shutters. She thought of Thomas, of his betrayal born from desperation. She thought of the overseer's watchful eyes. And she thought of Clara, who had chosen in that moment not to surrender Lydia's secret, but to shield it, even at the cost of her peace. It was a fragile bond, but it was strength all the same. Betrayal had struck, yet loyalty had answered. Lydia knew the stakes had risen. One false step could unravel everything, but her resolve only deepened. The suppers would continue, and so would her plan. The seventh supper was unlike the others. The Lefebvre prepared with unusual extravagance, for a visiting politician from Baton Rouge was to join the table. Servants rushed through the halls with polished trays, and extra candles were placed to make the dining room glow brighter than usual. Lydia felt the weight of the night pressing on her. Important guests meant important words, and important words meant both opportunity and danger. When the politician arrived, the air shifted. He was a stout man named Elias Thornton, his voice booming even in casual greetings, his laugh heavy with arrogance. He carried himself as though the city bent beneath his steps. Lydia observed him closely as she poured his wine, noting the way he gestured wide, the way he commanded the room without effort. Gentlemen, Thornton declared after the first toast, raising his glass high. Louisiana prospers because men like you keep her strong. The North rattles its chains of conscience, but gold answers louder than pity. We build the empire, and they envy us for it. The guests applauded, their glasses clinking, their pride swelling with his words. Yet Lydia, standing silent at his side, heard something else, the boast of a man too sure of his invincibility. As the meal went on, Thornton drank freely and his tongue loosened. Let me tell you, he said with a grin, a man in my position learns that law bends when gold applies the pressure. A tariff here, a bribe there, it smooths the path for progress. Without such measures, trade would strangle itself. Whitaker laughed loudly. A toast to bribes, then. May they always find the right hands. The table erupted in laughter, but Lydia's stomach turned. Each word painted the picture clearer. Their power was not built only on labor and land, but also on corruption woven into every decision. She masked her anger with steady movements, setting down a platter of duck as though she were deaf. Inside, she burned. Later in the evening, as thunder rumbled faintly outside, Lefebvre leaned toward Thornton. Tell me, Elias, what of the abolitionists? They grow bolder each year. Will their voices trouble the legislature? Thornton waved his hand dismissively. Words on paper, bah, they mean nothing. Men of wealth and position shape the law, not idealists with ink-stained fingers. Let them shout. We will keep our world intact. The arrogance of his tone struck Lydia deeply. She thought of the judge's cold declarations at the Last Supper, of the debts and divisions she had already seen, and now of this politician's shameless pride. Together they formed a map of weakness, a pattern of corruption hidden beneath the surface of power. In the kitchen afterward, Clara clutched Lydia's arm, her voice hushed but trembling. "You heard him. He admits it. Bribes, lies, all of it." "Lydia, this is dangerous knowledge. If you carry it, you carry fire in your hands." Lydia met her gaze, steady and unyielding. "Fire can burn, Clara, but it can also light the way." Samuel, overhearing from the stove, grunted. "Be careful, girl. Men like Thornton think themselves untouchable because they've bought the very air they breathe. You strike at that, and you'll find the weight of every coin against you." "I do not strike with coin," Lydia said softly. "I strike with truth. They cannot buy silence forever." That night, long after the guests had left and the hall fell quiet, Lydia sat awake, replaying every boast, every laugh, every arrogant toast. She etched it into her mind as carefully as a scribe etches ink onto parchment. The politician's pride had revealed more than he intended, and Lydia knew it was another thread in the web she wove. Her anger no longer burned wild but cold and controlled, sharpened into resolve. Supper by supper, truth by truth, she was gathering the tools she would need. And tonight the toast to power had shown her just how fragile that power truly was. The days after Thornton's supper weighed heavy on Lydia's mind. His arrogance, his boasting of bribes, still echoed in her ears. Each word confirmed what she had long suspected. Their power was not indestructible. It was fragile, built on lies, debts, and rivalries. Yet knowledge alone was not enough. Secrets trapped inside her mind would wither unless given wings. For the first time, Lydia considered sharing them. She found Jean-Baptiste at the French market on a humid afternoon. He leaned against his stall with his fiddle case nearby, his eyes scanning the crowd with practiced ease. When Lydia approached, basket in hand, his smile flickered, warm but edged with caution. "You walk as if your steps carry more than flour and beans," he said quietly. Lydia's voice was low, almost swallowed by the noise around them. "I have gathered truths. They speak openly at the table, thinking me deaf, but their words could break them if placed in the right ears." Jean's brow furrowed. "Truth is a blade, Lydia, sharp enough to cut the hand that wields it. Are you ready for that?" Her eyes did not waver. "I am ready, but I cannot do this alone. I need a path, a way for these truths to travel beyond these walls." June studied her for a long moment, the market's clamor filling the silence between them. At last, he leaned closer. "There are men and women in this city who despise what the planters stand for. Some meet in secret, others write pamphlets that find their way north. But to reach them, messages must be carried carefully, hidden in trade, tucked in songs. One mistake and the chain tightens instead of breaks." Lydia nodded. "I have hidden my memory in song already. I can do the same with words." Before Jean could reply, Clara appeared at her side, her face pale as she glanced nervously at the guards nearby. "Lydia," she hissed, "you're speaking too freely. Do you want to hang yourself in the square?" Jean softened his tone, though his words carried weight. "She speaks because silence alone will not save her. But trust must be earned. Lydia, if you wish to share, you must give me something first, a fragment of what you know." Lydia hesitated, the risk heavy on her tongue. Then she spoke, her voice barely audible. "They boast of bribes. A politician, Thornton, claims the law bends where gold presses." They laughed as he said it. Jean's eyes sharpened. If true, that is poison enough to spread doubt among their allies. But it must be proven. Clara gripped Lydia's wrist, her voice breaking. "No, don't give him more. Every word you share is another rope around your neck." Lydia turned to her friend, her voice steady but tender. "Clara, silence is its own rope. It only tightens as we wait. If I fall, then let it be carrying a truth that matters." Clara's tears welled, but she said no more, torn between terror and loyalty. Jean reached for a small basket beneath his stall, filled with herbs and cloth. He slipped a folded scrap of paper inside and handed it to Lydia. "If you truly wish to act, write what you remember. Hide it among the goods. I will see it travels where it must. But be certain, Lydia, once this begins, there is no turning back." Lydia took the basket, her heart pounding. "I have already begun," she whispered. As she walked back through the crowded market, Clara trailing in silence, Lydia felt the weight of her choice. The chains of silence had bound her for years, but now at last they had begun to break, not with a shout but with a whisper carried into the world beyond her reach. By the 12th supper, the Lefebvre household pulsed with a tense energy that even the servants could feel. Rumors swirled across New Orleans, merchants accusing one another of deceit, debts whispered in private corners, the creeping fear of abolitionist influence pressing in from the north. Tonight, nearly every powerful man Lydia had observed would gather under one roof. For her, this was not simply another supper, it was the moment she had waited for. The dining room blazed with candlelight, the table stretching long and heavy with dishes meant to impress. Lydia moved among the guests with her usual grace, but her heart carried a different weight. Each step, each pour of wine, each tray of food placed before them, was part of a silent strategy. The men wasted little time before their voices sharpened. Whitaker, already red with drink, barked across the table. "You speak of unity, but I see none. Lacroix bleeds his fortune away at the tables, and Pelletier cheats us all with his cutthroat prices. How long before the whole city collapses under such treachery?" Lacroix slammed his glass down, his voice trembling with both fury and shame. "Better a gambler than a drunkard who cannot hold his tongue." The insult cut deep, drawing gasps and laughter, but Lydia noticed more than the words. She had shifted a decanter just slightly earlier, ensuring it reached the hand most likely to drink too quickly. She had placed a folded napkin at the wrong seat, forcing men to swap places and disrupting the comfort of routine. Small, careful acts, but enough to fray tempers already stretched thin. Duval, his face tense, turned on Pelletier. "And you, your greed infects the market. You sell low to crush your rivals, then cry foul when debts rise. Do not pretend innocence here." Pelletier sneered, leaning back with false calm. "If you cannot outwit me in trade, Duval, perhaps you should grow cane instead of excuses." The storm Lydia had nurtured was breaking open before her eyes. Pride, envy, and desperation erupted in the very room where they believed themselves strongest. Their voices rose, hands slammed the table, and accusations flew like sparks in dry grass. Judge Pierce's voice cut through, cold and sharp. "Gentlemen, your squabbling is disgraceful. Do you not see? You reveal weakness before your own servants." The warning only deepened the division. Whitaker spat his words like venom. "Weakness? No, Judge. Weakness is hiding behind the law while our fortunes rot. What good are your courts when our allies betray us at every turn?" Lydia felt her pulse quicken, though her face remained calm. For the first time, the men's unity had shattered fully, no longer masked by toasts or hollow laughter, and she had played her part quietly, guiding the cracks wider with nothing more than patience and subtlety. In the kitchen later, Clara clutched her hand, whispering in awe. They were ready to tear each other apart. "What did you do?" Lydia's voice was steady, but her eyes carried the fire of triumph. "I did nothing but let their own pride speak louder than their reason. They planted the seeds long ago. I only gave them the silence to grow." Samuel, listening from the shadows, shook his head slowly. "You walk a dangerous road, child. Tonight you saw them fall against one another, but beware. A cornered man strikes hardest when he feels his power slipping." Lydia met his gaze, her resolve unshaken. "Then let him strike. Every blow they throw at one another frees us from their grip." That night, lying awake, Lydia replayed the chaos in her mind, the shouts, the insults, the fear etched into men who once believed themselves untouchable. The chains of silence had become a weapon, and for the first time she tasted victory. Yet she knew this was not an ending. It was only the first opening in a wall that had long seemed unbreakable, and as dawn approached, Lydia whispered into the dark, her words fierce and certain. "They have divided. Now they will fall." The morning after the 12th supper dawned thick with humidity, the air heavy as though the city itself had witnessed the quarrels of the night before. New Orleans stirred restlessly. Merchants muttered in the French market, rumors floated through taverns, and whispers clung to the air like smoke. The powerful men who once sat united now eyed one another with suspicion. Their laughter had turned into sharp edges, their toasts into bitter silence. Lydia, silent as ever, had watched it unravel, and for the first time she felt the weight of triumph. Clara moved beside her in the kitchen, her voice hushed but trembling with awe. "They fight among themselves now. You did this." Lydia turned, her eyes steady. "No, Clara. They did it to themselves. I only listened, remembered, and let their own words betray them." Clara's fear had not vanished, but something new flickered within her, something close to pride. "Then perhaps you were right all along. Silence can be a weapon." Samuel, standing near the hearth, studied Lydia with wary respect. "You've struck a blow without raising a hand. That takes more strength than fire ever could. But mark me, girl. The cracks you've opened may free some, yet they may also bring new dangers. Men with power don't surrender it quietly." "I know," Lydia replied, her voice calm, "but even power built on fear cannot last when trust is broken. And now, their trust is dust." That evening, Lydia met Jean-Baptiste once more near Congo Square. The distant hum of drums filled the air as twilight settled over the city. Jean's eyes searched hers, measuring the resolve that seemed to glow even in the fading light. "You've done more than I imagined," he said quietly. "The stories spread already, planters cursing one another, merchants doubting their allies. The foundation trembles." Lydia held his gaze. "Then let it tremble. I did not seek to burn the house down. I only needed them to fight among themselves. In their weakness we find our chance." John nodded slowly. "And what chance will you take now?" Her answer came steady as the beat of the drums. "To live, to see others live. Every fracture weakens the chains, and when the time comes, we will step through the break." Clara approached, her voice soft but resolute. "I used to be afraid of every shadow, but watching you, I see now that fear can be bent, just like law, just like power. If you walk through the break, Lydia, I will walk with you." The words filled Lydia with a quiet strength deeper than triumph. Clara's fear had become courage. Samuel's caution had become respect. Jean's guidance had become alliance. She was not alone anymore. That night, as she lay on her cot, Lydia reflected on the path she had taken. 12 suppers of silence, each one a step closer to freedom. She thought of her mother, lost to her but never forgotten. She thought of those still bound, their voices stifled, their hopes dimmed. And she thought of the cracks now spreading through the walls of power. She had not lifted a blade, had not raised her voice in rebellion, yet she had sown a storm they could not contain. The dawn that followed was not brighter, nor was the air lighter. Chains still clinked, overseers still watched, and the city still moved under the weight of slavery. But something had shifted, something invisible yet undeniable. Lydia had broken the chains of silence. And once silence is broken, it cannot be remade. Her story was not finished. It was only the beginning. So, if Lydia's courage and her silent weapon of memory have moved you, do not let her story be forgotten. Subscribe now to keep these voices alive, voices history tried to bury. And before you go, click on the video appearing here. Continue walking through the untold paths of resilience and defiance that shaped the world we inherit.